My name's Beckett.
My name's Jasper.
If you like this video, hit like, comment, subscribe. Join the Peanut Gallery.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Peanut Gallery. This is our Remembrance Day special, is what we're calling it. And today I am joined by my uncle, Frank Yeo, who is, welcome to the Peanut Gallery.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming in so very much. And I'll explain a little bit why my Uncle Frank is here. The history of my family involves a contact or connections to the Second World War, and really the beginnings of how we all came to be came from a very dark part of history. But there was something bright came from that, and I invited you to come on because I wanted to share a little bit about what life was like, what we've learned about Nana's life and Grandpa's life from that time in the war, and through what life was like if you lived in England at the time, and the difficulties that they faced, and the difficulties that the soldiers faced, and also, I wanted to kind of talk about, what it was like coming to Canada, and like the change that took place, leaving a place like England and then coming to a new country, and what that was like for Nana. And so thank you very much for coming on. I appreciate you being willing to share your time and share what memories you have. I mean, we've discussed this. It's been, you're in your 78th year. From what I said 80 earlier, but again, you wanted me to make sure I was clear that was my dad. So we're drawing on some memories. We're also drawing on what others have told us about family, and the memories they have, and also some drawing on memories of what we've learned from going to the. You've made a journey to the military museum in Ottawa. And also just what you've learned from different family members having conversations with you. So thank you for joining us on this Remembrance Day episode. Canada's involvement in wars. I mean, we, from what I've learned and from what I've read online, we were involved in both the Great Wars. A little bit different, World War I to World War II. As from what I understand, Newfoundland wasn't part of Canada yet, so there was a Canadian detachment group that went over, and there's also a group from Newfoundland that went to fight. Mm-hmm. But I was really amazed as I was reading and doing some background on the First World War that there was like over 650,000 Canadians that served in the First World War, and for a country that wasn't even 8 million people, mm-hmm. To have roughly 7% of our population cross the ocean to go and fight, that's just absolutely incredible. And from what I've read, we had more than 172,000 people were wounded, 66,000 people lost their life. Basically coming back from World War I, roughly 3% of the population had either died or was wounded in that Great War. Mm-hmm. And that's crazy to think about that. And then there was again a peaceful time, and then we and I really believe, at least from my reading, a lot of how World War I ended kind of set the groundwork for World War II.
Right.
And as we come into World War II in 1939, and this is kind of where our story will kind of pick up, and our history, our family history. Canada was again, I guess, a little bit different position. Now not really being under the British English control so much, but rather more acting as an independent country, decided to enter into the war this time, rather than basically when England said we're going to go fight, Canada was already automatically included. This time, Canadian government was more like making the decision to enter in, realizing that if they didn't help step up, then Nazi Germany was going to take over and basically destroy Western culture, mm-hmm. And most likely take over rule of the world. I mean, their goal to dominate. But from what I read, Canadian Army at that time, over 1 million people from the beginning of the war to the end served. Our Army was over 600,000 strong. Our Air Force was it was more than 200,000 people strong, and our Navy, which is amazing. And I mean, some of the it's pretty incredible, the Canadian Navy and the British Navy. But we were almost 100,000 people strong in the Navy, and what started as like no Navy, by the end of World War II, was like one of the strongest navies in the world, and responsible for most of the supply chain back and forth, which is pretty incredible. And that's also part of where our story will go. So some of the other involvement that Canada's had in wars: Korean War, Persian Gulf War, the Afghanistan War. So very involved when it comes to conflicts worldwide. And also we have a very a good history of being peacekeepers around the world and desiring people not to fight and to try to help provide mediation and be a country that wants to bring peace to a situation that could otherwise be very catastrophic. So, but before we dive in, maybe share a little bit about with us about who you are, maybe your background a little bit, and how you ended up in Canada. I know originally born in England, but maybe you could kind of give us like the lead story of how you came to be, and maybe how that all happened, where Nana met Grandpa, and what you know about that.
Well, what I know, of course, I was very young. Very young. In fact, actually, at the beginning, I wasn't even around. So, no, my mother was in the British Army, but it was called the Home Guard.
Right.
Okay, so she wasn't in a fighting regiment or anything like that. She was actually a fire watcher.
Right.
So she would be stationed at a certain area, and they would spot fires and have to call it in, and because at that time everything was blacked out.
Right.
So it was very important that they get the fires out. My father, of course, he was a Canadian soldier, enlisted in London, and actually was in the first contingent of Canadian soldiers going to Europe.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. He was.
So you've been like 1939,
1940, early 40. So his regiment was attached to the British 8th Army, which was fighting in North Africa.
Okay.
So they were sent there. How my mom and dad got together, well, that's kind of a story I'm not really up to date on, other than the fact that there was a large Army presence, a huge base along the English Channel, where my mother and her family were evacuated to. So her family was from Portsmouth, England, which is the home base of the Royal Navy, and it was just bombed every day. So a lot of the families were moved out. Her family was moved down the coast to a small little town village called Bognor Regis. And just outside of Bognor Regis on the coast was a large Army base. So somewhere along the line, anyways, they met.
So I heard a bit of this story, and I don't know how true it is. I've always wanted to talk to you about it and figure out. But I heard like a lot of English people had pet dogs.
Yeah.
And from what I understand, being in the war, the food was rationed like crazy,
right,
unless you were like a British or Canadian soldier. And they had a lot more supplies because they were going to go fight.
Right.
So the general population was restricted to be able to allow those that were going to fight the necessary supplies to both supply them at the base, but also those in Africa and every place else to be able to support them. So what I've heard from the story is that the dog would wander off to where the food was.
Right.
And the English girls would have to go find their pets.
That's right.
And the soldiers were smart, and they would feed the dogs.
That's right.
And what ended up happening is that they started realizing that these animals had cute owners, and if they fed the dog might return, and so would the girl.
Yeah.
And that is how...
that's basically how they met, yes. That's basically how they met, yeah.
Grandpa was smart.
Yes. So anyway, as it went along, of course, he was away and then back, because some of them would get leave. They would be brought back to have retraining. Right. There was bases in...
Grandpa's role in the Army, what was the position you said he had?
He was a motorcycle dispatch rider.
Okay, a motorcycle dispatch rider.
Which was a very dangerous position, simply because they had to carry a dispatch from the back part where the generals were up to the front line,
With no protection, basically.
Well,
they're on a motorcycle.
That's
go.
right. Yeah.
You've got the information. You take it to where you need. You get it there.
Yeah, and that was his job.
And I've heard stories about being shot at by the German Air Force as he's trying to take the messages, and just how crazy that was. Constantly having to like dive into ditches and.
Well, they would put rope or wire across the road, so that the motorcycle rider would run into it
and decapitate them.
Yeah. It was a very. I don't think there was any job,
No, there was no job that was safe.
That was safe, and that was a really dangerous one, really dangerous.
Yeah, even people who, like, if you think, they got to stay back at the base, that was safe. Well, we've already talked about how much they got bombed out.
Right.
Like, endlessly bombed out. I remember Nana telling about counting. They would be in the house and they'd be counting.
Yeah.
Because in between every bomb dropping would be a certain number of seconds, and you could hear where it would land, and you would count, and you would wonder if it was going to be your house next.
Well, they would leave the house and go out into the backyard, and there would be corrugated tin or steel little bomb shelter, and it was above ground, wasn't in the ground, and they would crawl in there, and they would stay there until the raid was over to get out of the house, in case the house was bombed and that. But they would be in their backyard.
Wow.
In these corrugated tin,
So here comes the jets, the airplanes, here comes the bombers, the sirens start going off, and it's run to the backyard and pandemonium until the sirens stop.
Yeah. I asked her one time, I said, how did you manage? How did you get through it? She says, it was so much a part of your life at that time that you just got up in the morning, you just got dressed, and you just went about your business. And then if the siren went off, you went
off.
You went and got out of the way, into a shelter or whatever. And then as soon as it was over, back out doing your job. She said it was just life.
Now, I remember telling her, I was looking at photos, family photos, and everybody was in uniform. And she said, at that time, if you lived in England, you served.
Yeah.
There was basically nothing that people did not do during that stretch of time. That wasn't, if you were a younger person, you served in the auxiliary, nurse, or you were an auxiliary, and then like everybody had a role when it came to what was happening. It blew my mind to think about how everybody was engaged.
Yeah, it was like what's it called, the home guard.
Yeah.
And they were guarding their home. And that's what they were doing.
Just unreal. Yeah. All right, so somehow they get married.
Yeah, somehow they get married.
Have you heard any stories about how that happened? Did they have a chaplain that was there that just married them? Was it like a...
I actually got their wedding photo at home. I should have brought it with me, and I'm sorry I didn't.
I think my mom has a copy.
And
of
they
that
were married in
the
uniform.
Basement. Yeah, I remember. Yeah. He's in uniform. Yeah, I've seen that photo.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's just wild.
Yeah.
And then I've heard stories about honeymoon. And honeymoon, they went to London or something.
Yeah.
She talks about the Thames River on their honeymoon being on fire.
Yeah. That was one of the stories that she talked about that was on fire. Another one that she told me is that they would spend the night in the subway, like in the underground.
Right, in the tube.
Away from the bombing, because that was the safest place to be, was underground. And, just stories like that, that have come along. As I said,
we're piecing it all together through history.
I'm kind of forgetful at my age. But,
right, and for you, it was, if we were to continue the story, you were born in England.
Yeah, I was born in Bognor Regis, this little coastal town.
Right, outside of where the hometown was in Portsmouth,
yeah.
Because you were away from the bombing, at least trying to get further away.
Right. Some of the stories she would tell me is that in Britain, mostly in Britain, every town, city, village has a high street. And the high street is always the main street. That's where the shops are. And she would say we would go down to the shops, to shop. And when you're walking along the street, all the shop doors would be open. And that was because the Germans would come off the channel and strafe the streets. So people would run into the shops. Well, trying to get into a shop with a door closed and you got a buggy or a carriage, I guess you would call it at the time.
Because she's carrying you around in the carriage.
Yeah. They would run into the shops until, till they stopped strafing.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it is. Just crazy. Just some of the stories like that.
So strafing, if people are listening, they don't know what that means. Basically, the German fighters, after they did their bombing or even before, would unload their guns. So
Right.
their machine guns and basically try to do as much damage psychologically or otherwise
Yep.
to the people in the towns and try to break their will by basically dive bombing them and shooting them.
Yeah,
And
in the
just
street.
as much as they could, just light up every street they could as they would be leaving to cross the English Channel before their fuel ran out.
Right.
Right? It's
Right.
just insane.
Yeah, it was. It was insane.
It just blows me away to think about the fact that they were diving into shops
Yeah. Having the doors were kept open by the shopkeeper. And
just
they
in
would
case
run.
just in case the strafing happened.
Yeah. It's just,
What a way to live.
Yeah, I just couldn't imagine. And I visited Bognor Regis. I took a trip to Bognor.
Really?
And I drove up and down that street. I rented a car, or over there they call it you hire a motor. And anyways, so my family and I, we drove up and down the high street from the top down to the coast and back, just to get an idea
Of what that would have been like.
Yeah, what that would have been like. And you see the shops all along. Yeah, really an amazing time. How they persevered, how they kept their sanity.
Yeah, I can't imagine living under the mental load.
Oh.
Like and not to diminish what we go through today,
No, I know.
but the mental load of constantly the next sound
Hmm.
could be a bomb landing on your house or a bullet coming through your window.
That's right.
Like it just floors me
Yeah.
to think of the strength that you would have to develop to be able to make it through to the other side of that.
Right.
So
And my father would tell my mother, he would say, after this is all over, and they talked. I mean, they were going to survive. That was it, and that's the way they talked.
Right.
He said, when this is over, he says, I'm going to take you home to my home. He says, and he said, you will not believe the beauty and what it's like there. He said, there's no war. He said it's clean air, there's no smell of fire or gunfire or bombing or anything. He says, I'm going to take you there. And he says, I will provide for you. He was very, very adamant about that. And so by the time the war came to a close and we were, able to get out of Britain, she couldn't wait to come to Canada. She was honored.
So I just, again, we've talked about this a few times, but so it was 1945.
1945.
The war's still going on.
Yeah, it was the end of March.
It's the end of March, and she, the decision is made that while her husband is still doing dispatch and he's in Italy now,
Yeah.
that she's going to get on a boat and she's going to travel across the ocean and come to Canada. Can you described a little bit about that before. Can you describe what that scene was like when that journey? Now you're a toddler,
Right.
okay? So you're just a little dude.
I just a little dude. So
Yeah.
she's got a suitcase in one hand and my hand in her other hand, and we have a telegram saying, be in Liverpool at such and such a time at certain dock. And so she gets on the train, and we go to London because everything goes to London.
And then from there,
Then from London to Liverpool. And here we are, just the two of us. We get to Liverpool, and she got off the train and got to the docks. And she said the Canadian government had these tables all lined up along the dock, and it was all alphabetical. So, of course, with the last name Y, we were at the end. But she said, you went there? She said, oh, yes, you're Mrs. Yeo. Yeah. This is your son, Franklin. Yeah. And this is your berth. And then they had a porter or a guy, I guess, take her onto the ship and show her where she was supposed to go. And we were on that ship for 11 days in convoy.
in convoy, of course. Okay, again,
Because the war wasn't over.
right? It wasn't over.
No.
There's still submarines and Germans and enemies, and so she's on this boat.
Yeah.
To me, in our day, we get on a plane and we're there in 5 hours.
Yeah.
6 hours, something like that.
We were 11 days.
Yeah, 11 days on the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah. And the ship was filled with wounded. So, I mean, it was just jam-packed. And I don't know if you've been on a cruise ship.
No.
Okay, and I haven't neither. But anyways, these staterooms, a lot of them aren't very large. There was 2 families to a stateroom.
Wow.
Like, it was just packed. But anyways, we get to Halifax, Pier 21, And we offload from the boat. Here she is again, suitcase and toddler. And again at the tracks, because there was all kinds of tracks right there. And there we were. Okay, you go to that certain table. Yep, Mrs. Yeo, yep. You're on train number such and such on track 5. We go over there, and we board this train. And actually, if you can believe it, it was 5 days from Halifax to London.
Wow.
Because the train stopped
everywhere to let people
everywhere.
off, right?
And they had wounded, because the wounded were on the train too.
It takes time.
Right? They were trying to get people home. That's what they were doing. It's one of the stories that she told me that stuck out in my mind, and I've never forgotten it. We got to Montreal, and as the train was pulling into the station, all the girls with their children and that were all at the window at the train, looking out. Well, along the platform were all these vendors, and they were selling fruit and vegetables and everything. They hadn't seen a banana or an orange in 6-7 years.
Wow.
There was no fruit whatsoever in Britain. And she said they were just clamoring to get off that train to buy bananas and oranges and stuff like that. She said it was absolutely amazing.
I can only
absolutely
imagine.
Amazing.
See, I think about coming into a country, and I think, I got on a plane, and we're just coming in, and 30 seconds or a minute before you land, you start seeing that country. I can't think of what it would have been like being out at sea for 10 and a half days or 10 days, and then all of a sudden you start seeing the Canadian coast.
Yeah.
And people start talking about, there it is.
Yeah. And one of the things that came to their mind was this, there was no smell of smoke. There was no smell of bombing or airplane fuel or anything. It was just so clean. All the women that were in the area with my mother, they were just, some were crying because it was just most amazing experience. It was just beautiful. It was all green, and it was just, it was there. There was no, nothing was destroyed.
No wonder that was like the land of hope.
Oh,
right?
she was thrilled. And then to have to get on a train for a 5-day trip.
11 and then it's a tighter quarters on a train. Oh, man. And we're not talking it's not a train today.
No.
We're talking a train back in 1945.
Yeah. Can you imagine a steam engine and stopping at every little town and village and city, letting off war brides, because that's what my mother was, a war bride, and wounded.
So all the way from Halifax, they come all the way through Toronto, and then all the way down to London.
Yes,
I'm sure at Toronto they had to change.
Switch trains,
and then other trains were going to take off to different destinations.
And when we get to London, we had to switch trains and get on the LMPS.
Oh, that's right.
And then come to St. Thomas on that train.
On that north to south track. Wow.
Never seemed, she said the trip never seemed to end.
All right. So what do you remember about when they arrived in St. Thomas? Is there anything that the family obviously was there to greet them?
Yeah. And of course, she knew nobody.
It wasn't like you could hey, we're on the train. We just got on in London.
No, they were at the station. My grandmother and my one aunt and uncle, they were there to meet her.
Wow.
And she didn't know who they were. He came up to her and he says, "Are you Linda?" Just scared the daylights out of her. That's what she told me. She says, "I didn't know what to do." Would you go with a man that you didn't know today? No, not at all. Not at all. And yet, what choice did she have back then? I mean, here she was 4,000 miles away from home, no husband because he's still in Italy.
Wow.
Got a little 2-year-old. Are you Linda? So then they get on the London and Port Stanley Railroad, and they come to St. Thomas. Well, my grandmother's house was a block and a half from the railway.
Okay.
So, then they walked because they didn't have a car. My grandfather, all the years that he lived, he was 78 or 80 when he died, never had a license, never drove.
Wow.
So they always depended on their children, to take them places. So, walking was a big thing back in 1945.
Yeah, because I remember the stories about walking down Flora Street.
Yeah.
And they would take you to Sunday school.
Yeah.
At that red brick church across from what is now Arthur Voden Secondary School.
Yeah, it used to be called St. John's, and now it's called St. Thomas Anglican Church.
Right. They would take you down there and bring you down for church.
Yep. and funny, because at 2 years old, I was talking.
Yeah.
I was talking and everything like that. My grandmother on a Sunday afternoon would take me out on the street down to the neighbors. She'd go to different neighbors, and they would get me to talk.
Because they want to hear your accent.
Yeah, they want to hear my accent.
Check this out, girls.
Yeah. And different little stories, like my mom would take me uptown. One time she took me uptown and she wanted to buy a blanket. And she was in the store and she was looking at it and she was, oh, this is so nice. But she didn't realize, well, I don't know what color I want, like that. And the girl said to her, well, you can take both of them. She said, I can have both? See, they didn't know this at home. They had ration tickets. They were allowed just so much.
Right.
She said, oh, yeah. She said, you could have whatever you want.
There was no limit.
There was no limit. My mother was just flabbergasted. She had no idea.
For years, they had virtually nothing.
Yeah,
and then
what
all
they
of a sudden
went through.
she's allowed to have more than one blanket for her.
So, she just was thrilled. Like, she realized that my dad spoke the truth to her. Like, he was going to bring her here, and it was going to be great, It was going to be wonderful. And it was, even though he wasn't home yet.
So what have you been able to piece together about his return? So it's 1945 still.
That was a little difficult for me because I ran away and hid. I didn't know him. He scared me.
Oh, really? You didn't know him, right?
No. So that was upsetting. That was upsetting for him, right? He wanted his child to run into his arms and all that stuff. And meanwhile, I took off the other way.
So he's coming back from a horrible...
6 years.
Right. And the one thing he wants is for his family to be together.
Yeah.
But well, I can understand.
I ran and hid.
From a toddler's point of view, you don't know who this person is.
I didn't know him.
You didn't know that was Dad.
Scared the daylights out of me.
Like, who's this person?
Yeah.
Right? And all he wanted was to be able to hold you.
Yeah.
Like,
that's right. I mean, it came around. They got me. They had to find me.
Yeah. But in time, though, I can only imagine how hard that would be.
Yeah. Now, we were all living at my grandmother's house. Okay.
Now, where was that?
And it was on Yarwood Street in St. Thomas.
Okay.
Number 16. And my grandmother and grandfather, they had 7 children. And I think 5 of the families were all at my grandmother's house. It was just a mad house.
No wonder there was such a housing boom following the war,
I can remember
right?
my mom later on saying to me, I couldn't wait to get out of there. She says, your father came home and I said to him, we're getting out of here right now.
This is too much like that ship and train, and we are finding ourselves a place. Is that where 117 and a half came in?
No, that was later. We moved about 5 or 6 times in a span of 5 years, I guess.
Was it always in basically the same neighborhood in St. Thomas?
It was. The one time we lived on the other side of on the south side of the city one time, but usually we were. It was funny because my grandmother, they lived here, and my aunt lived down the street. My other aunt lived around the corner. My uncle, he lived over here. We lived down there. My other uncle lived beside us.
So everybody was close.
Everybody was close.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was one of those things. One of the little stories that Mom told me was that as they had to be so careful with me because if I heard a siren, I was gone.
Huh.
I was just gone. They would spend an hour trying to find me because I was hiding. I was in the shelter. Do you know what I mean? From the air raids.
So you didn't even know it, but it was like a PTSD reaction to what you remember.
Yeah. Now, how does a 2-year-old but that's ingrained. You hear a siren, you run.
You're gone.
Yeah. And that's one of the stories that Mom used to tell me. She said, as soon as they heard the siren, someone would say, grab Franklin, because everybody called me Franklin.
Yeah.
And it was, grab him before he gets away.
Wow, we never even thought.
Just be frightened to death at 2 years old.
Yeah, because I remember St. Thomas when I was little, and this is long time past war, but they were always preparing the city and town for what could be.
Yeah.
Nice. From what I remember, St. Thomas used to train. World War II, they had a pilot training facility in St. Thomas. There
was 2 bases here, one in Aylmer, which is the police college.
Right.
Right.
And
one at Fingal.
Right.
And then they were all housed at the psychiatric hospital.
Right.
It was built as a psychiatric hospital, but the war broke out. And so they used it
as the base.
And
they were training pilots.
Yeah. And it was unbelievable. Yeah. They and the train ran, the LMPS ran right behind the psych there, behind the nurses' residence.
Right.
That they had built. So the airmen would go over there and they'd get on it and go to Port Stanley and to the Stork Club and to the dances and all that stuff. I remember
the stories about the Stork Club.
Yeah, so all of that happened around here too. So
you had the big boppers come through there back in the day.
This was a big area for training in that.
That's why I remember the air sirens still being active when I was little.
Oh, yeah, they were.
I remember they would test them once or twice a year. They were loud.
Yeah, there was
one on the top of Arthur Voden.
Yeah.
I remember that.
And there was one
which is only like 2 blocks away from where Nana lived.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, we used to get them all the time.
It was loud.
Yeah. But that was a Cold War thing, you know, with
I
the
understand that.
Russians
I just remember hearing the siren. I can only imagine like you as a toddler, and that hearing that noise and it being so ingrained in your head what it meant.
Yeah, they'd have to grab me.
Yeah, because you were getting out of there.
I was gone.
Yeah, when he died.
So different things like that. And another story they told me is my uncle, my mom. I don't know what my mom was doing, but my uncle took me, and he took me uptown, and he got my hair cut. Because my mother had little ringlets, I guess, or whatever you want to call it, curls. And he took me and got my hair cut, and then he bought me an ice cream, right? Because I was terrified when they were cutting my hair. But anyway, he bought me an ice cream. I didn't know what to do with it. I'd never had one.
Huh.
And here it is melting, and my uncle saying you're supposed to eat it.
Lick it. It's ice cream.
Well, anyways, he took me home. Wow. My mother just lost it because you cut my son's hair. And he
didn't even know, right?
All my ringlets were gone.
So
I could just imagine.
Tell me a little bit about, what you've learned about your dad when he came home.
Yeah.
Like, what were the circumstances for his return? And then once he got home, what have you been able to piece together about how the war impacted him?
Well, the government had said that these men that went to war, when they come home, would get their job back.
Right.
They weren't to be, let go or anything like that. So my father at the time, was very uneducated. Okay, left school I think at the end of grade 6. His father would deliver coal in the wintertime.
Now, that wasn't unusual.
No.
Like, it wasn't unusual to leave school at the time. If you finished, like, grade school, like public school, we call it today.
Yeah.
Well, back,
a lot of people
prior to me going to school, there was Catholic and Protestant school before it became, like, public school.
Right.
But, like, a lot of people, if you made it to grade 8, that was great.
Yep. And he didn't. He left to help his father, and they delivered coal on a horse-drawn wagon. And then in the summertime, they would deliver ice, to the ice box because you didn't have a refrigerator.
And they would just, for the ice or the milk or whatever, I've heard stories about they would just come like right into your house, check your milk, and if you didn't have what you need, they would put the new milk in. And
yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, a lot of the homes that were built, what they call wartime houses, so they were built, say, from 45 to, say, the early 50s.
Yep.
A lot of them at the side door, they'll have a little side door.
Right, and that's the coal chute, right? Or
No,
that was the milk.
That was where the milk.
Right.
So you would put your empty bottles in there, and then in the morning he would come along, he'd open that up, he'd see 2 empty bottles, he'd put 2 full ones in. That's how they did it.
Mm.
Yeah. It was quite something. And then, of course, the Iceman would come along with his horse-drawn wagon, and us kids, being, tiny, we'd go out there, and he'd chip off a little piece of ice and give it to us. So we met him every day.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was really a different world back then, and it was a different life in St. Thomas. We had horse-drawn bread, horse-drawn milk, horse-drawn ice delivered, stuff like that. Another situation I can remember as a young boy, my father would go to work, and he would say, the coal man's coming today.
Mm.
So, you be around so you can go downstairs and open up the window to the bin. So I'd go in there, and I'd open up the window, and he'd put the chute in. He'd fill the coal bin up. Well, then you have to climb over the coal to close the window.
Yeah.
So, those were little jobs, that we did. That was some of the things that I did when I was younger. As far as my father, like I said, I feel today, and I do believe it today, that my father had the PTSD. He really did. And a lot of the men did. A lot of the men suffered terribly, and there was no help for them because they didn't understand it back then. You know what I mean? You just went to war and you fought and you're home, get on with your life. And, so my dad, on one hand, was a little strict.
Right.
Okay? A little firm, I should say, probably better than the word strict. But we knew our place, my brother and I. My sister, your mother, she got away with murder.
Yeah, I heard that.
My brother and I, we suffered the consequence.
Yeah, I heard that she was allowed to do whatever she
it
wanted
was
to do.
terrible.
Drove Nana crazy.
Oh, yes.
And
of course,
daddy's girl.
I was always, my mother's favorite. And my mother always said it and would say it out loud. And I'd have to say to her, Mom, you can't talk like that. You can't say that. Well, it's the truth. And I'd say, well, maybe it is the truth, but you can't say that. I says, because you're upsetting everybody. But that stems from her with me, as a baby, as a toddler, coming all that way.
All that connection.
Traveling with her.
Yeah.
And right till the day she died,
Yeah.
that was the way she felt.
Yeah. Well, you guys had a bond because of that connection.
Oh.
You were her companion on that journey.
Yeah. And really, all my years of living before my mother died, I was always my mother's best friend. Always. Now, my dad died early.
Yeah.
He died in 1964 from cancer, terrible. But
he was 45.
45 years old. Mom never remarried. She ended up took a course at Fanshawe and became a registered nursing assistant,
right?
RNA, and worked at the psych for 28 years, I guess it was, almost 30 years. And then she retired. So, she went on, but she had no want to go back to Britain.
Yeah.
She didn't want to go back there and live. This was her home. This was her family. This is where she had her children. Like she raised her family here. And this is where she wanted to stay.
Did she ever, she never really, in my conversation with her, she never really talked a whole lot about, she would tell me stories about everybody fought in the war, and she would tell me little stories here and there. Did she ever share anything more with you on the subject of that, or did both Nana and Grandpa leave that whole world behind? How did they treat that around you guys?
Yeah. My father never talked about the war. You could ask him a question, and he wouldn't talk to you about it. All he would say is that he was in North Africa, and he would say, if you ever have a chance to travel the world, you should see some of the cities in North Africa. Now, whatever that meant, I don't know. He just said that some of them were very beautiful. Never talked about the war. Never talked about his time on the motorcycle, at the army base. Never talked about being wounded in Italy. Nothing. No, couldn't get a word out of him. And Mom, for all that she was, because she was just in the Home Guard, right?
Right.
So she talked about, spotting fires and at one period there, she was an officer's cook,
right,
for whatever, on the Isle of Wight, just off of Portsmouth. But no, they didn't. They
basically leave that whole thing behind.
Yeah.
Now, that's why she never wanted to really. When she came to Canada, it was like a fresh start. Yeah,
it was. She was getting away, and of course, when she left Britain, it was a mess.
Yeah,
it was in ruins, and everywhere you went, everything just rubble and bombed out, and of course, her hometown of Portsmouth was just destroyed.
Yeah,
so
terrible situation.
Yeah, even when I went there in 1998, we there were still some places that had not been rebuilt.
Really?
Yeah. Now, mind you, it's a beautiful town.
Yeah.
Or city, I guess you would call it. And it's still the home base of the Royal Navy. So it's really captivating, we went all through the docks. I was on Nelson's ship, the Victory. We toured the Victory. They allowed us on the boat. We went down below, up and top. Then they said, oh, this is the casket that they had filled with I guess, I don't know what it would be called, some sort of a liquor, and that's what they put Nelson's body in to get him back to England so it wouldn't decay.
Oh, wow.
Oh, some of the things are
they had
unbelievable.
To do to make, yeah. So we're just a few days away from what will be Remembrance Day in 2021. It almost seems like we can't even touch, even World War II and what life was like.
No.
What things do you remember, or will you be remembering or thinking about heading into Remembrance Day? I remember Nan, she would always go to the War Memorial on Remembrance Day.
I would take her a lot of the times.
Yeah, it wasn't even like a question.
No.
She was going to go.
Yeah, it's the same with me. I don't remember a time, maybe last year, of course, with the downside of it. I don't remember a time of ever missing it. I remember when the War Memorial was over on Pearl Street at the old hospital, the old
Right.
Memorial Hospital.
Yeah.
And I used to go to the services over there as a young boy because it was so ingrained in me, you know. And I mean, I go now. I take my son with me. We go to the services. We go back to the Legion afterwards, listen to some of the old stories, although they're few and far between now.
Yeah.
But no, it just means so much to me. We wouldn't have what we have today if it wasn't for the people of yesterday. You know, of going over there, and a lot of them gave their lives. You know, a lot of them came home, you know, and were a mess.
Yeah.
You know, but we wouldn't have what we have today if it wasn't for them. And you can't forget that.
No.
You can't forget. I don't. It's.
Do you think we live in a time where people have, like, Canada's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is a beautiful, amazing country to live in. Like, we're still that country of hope that the people on those boats saw as they were pulling into harbor and coming up to dock.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's kind of almost lost on our generation?
Oh yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, you can get a lot of stories, probably more stories than I've been able to tell you, you know, from a lot of the people in this area that came over after the war, you know, and came here and eked out a wonderful life, you know, farmed and worked and, you know, have done wonderful, raised a big family, you know. That, to me, that's just not there now. I mean, we don't have that today. And a lot of people today, I don't think about, you know, Remembrance Day. Now, there was a story a couple of years ago, and I remember a fellow, and he was on CBC, and he had come up from the States,
Right.
and it was at Remembrance Day, and he was in Ottawa, and he went to the ceremony, and he came away. He was just absolutely blown away. He said, "I have never been to such a ceremony." He said it was absolutely amazing how they remember, you know, the war, remember the war dead, and remember the soldiers that survived, and how, you know, how they salute them. So, I mean, that's telling you something. I mean, the government here really does.
Yeah.
It really does work at it. Yeah. And I mean, if you ever have a chance to go to the War Museum in Ottawa, it really is a place to visit. I mean, you know, it's really something.
That's where you found the picture of
amazing
of Grandpa on the train, right?
Yeah.
Tell me about that. So you went there because you were searching.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, yeah. I went there. I had my youngest son with me, and we went to the War Museum. And on the first floor was all World War I. Okay. Then you go up the stairs, and it's World War II. Well, there was this mural on the wall as you come up the stairs. That's the first thing you see. And there's my father hanging out of a window of a train, waving goodbye as the train was leaving the station. I was mortified. I didn't know what to do. So there was not a guard, but an attendant. He was there. And I said, "Can I take a picture of this?" Because, you know, they don't allow stuff like that.
Right.
I said, this is my father. I said, "I can't believe this." And I took the picture.
So you're walking up the stairs, and there's Grandpa waving at you.
Yeah, there's Grandpa waving at me. Unbelievable.
That's just a wild story.
Yeah, just wild stuff. But those are little things, you know. So, but as I said, I mean, I was 2 when I came here, you know, so I don't remember that. It's amazing that I don't remember the boat ride.
Yeah.
You know, 11 days on a boat,
yeah.
Rocking and rolling. I can't go on a boat now because I get seasick.
Maybe some more PTSD from that moment. Who knows?
But anyways, yeah, but that's where we are. And, you know, I've always, Mom was always special to me, everything, you know, everything that she went through. And, you know, losing her husband early on in life, you know, she was just early 40s when her husband died. And, you know, went on to get herself a career and raise her family. Yeah. You know, she still had a 6-year-old at home. Yeah. So, and your mom. Yeah. Your mom wasn't that old. What, 13?
Yeah, 13.
Yeah. So, I mean, she had that.
Yeah.
So, and of course, I hung around. I didn't get married till I was 26. So, She kept saying, "When are you leaving?"
Yeah, that's the way it would be even when you went for a visit.
I
That
know.
English sense of
Humor, too.
yeah.
Unbelievable.
Don't you have someplace to be?
Why are you down here bothering me?
I just came to say hi. No, I'm coming in. Where's
Well,
the
you
candies
know,
on the kitchen table? Come on.
You've been there.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being willing to come in and share the memories that you have and what you've learned about a young soldier who went off to war, somehow found love, and came back and pieced together a pretty cool story of family and resilience and determination. And that's why we're here today. So thank you.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
appreciate that. Thanks for joining us today on the Peanut Gallery.